Hello everyone, this is Amit here, your mentor for this course on international relations. This is the third lecture of this particular lecture series on international relations. Okay, the topic of this particular lecture is evolution of India's foreign policy. Okay, now India is a country, or as a country, the age of India is 72 plus years. There is a 73rd year that's going on, right? Now, in this 73 years, India has covered a journey sufficiently long enough, and it's sufficient enough to learn lessons from whatever India has done in the past, and accordingly to strategize for the future. This particular topic, evolution of India's foreign policy, talks about exactly those lessons which India has learned and how India shaped and reshaped its foreign policy approach during the course. Okay. Now, in this video, the way we are going to approach this topic, and at the same time the significance of this topic for our syllabus. Practically speaking, in last 6 years, from 2013 to 2019, at least on 4 occasions we have seen direct questions from this particular area. At the end of the video, I'll be coming across those 4 questions. Obviously, we'll be discussing those questions and how to approach those questions. But to tell you, this is just the idea, a brief idea about the significance of this topic, why we are taking up this topic. There's a reason for this. Simultaneously, how are we going to approach this topic? What is going to be the structure of this video? At first, we are going to divide these 73 years of India's experience in various phases, in 3 phases primarily. The first approach that we will be taking up is an academic approach. This is the approach in which the academicians, they study India's or evolution of India's foreign policy. And simultaneously, within these 3 phases, we are going to look into the various nitty-gritties, the smaller policies which have been framed from time to time in different era or in different phases. We are also going to look at those particular individual policies. Okay. Not only that, not only these 2 things, the phases and the policies within. Very recently, on 19th of November 2019, while delivering the 4th Ramnath Goenka Memorial Lecture, the present Minister of External Affairs, Mr. S. Jaishankar, he came out with his own conceptualization of the various phases or the era or the different era of India's foreign policies. He divided these 73 years into 6 phases. In this discussion, we are also going to look at his conceptualization, because this is the recent most conceptualization and we are expecting questions from there as well. Clear? So, I'm going to look at that as well. Okay, again, let me warn you, this subject as such is a very dynamic subject. International relations is perhaps the most dynamic subject in your syllabus. However, this particular topic, evolution of India's foreign policy, this is not so dynamic. Somehow things are a bit static here in respect to the other parts. As for the structure of the syllabus, in the first video only, I have given you the structure of the syllabus, how in different particular area I am going to divide the syllabus given by UPSC, and then how I have divided I have conceptualized or I have framed my own syllabus. This is the third topic in that particular syllabus, right? Let's start it here. Well, I must admit, the academicians, they have divided these 73 years in 3 phases. The first phase starts from 1946-47. You must be knowing this, that in December 1946, the Constituent Assembly of India, it started working, and during that point of time only the ministry also took its oath and started functioning. The ministry with the Prime Minister Nehru, right? So it was practically from 1946 that the government of India, which would become the future independent government of India, they had started functioning. Clear? So from 1946-47 only started our foreign policy making. From 46-47 to 1970, Academicians call this the Nehruvian era. Nehruvian era of foreign policy making. Okay. The next phase starts from 1971, goes on till 1991. This phase is starkly opposite to the Nehruvian era. Academicians, they named this as Indira Doctrine or Indira era. Okay. And the third phase, the phase in which we are living in right now, from 1991 till date. This is the present economy-centric foreign policy. Okay, these are the three eras as such, which we see in India's foreign policy making. Fine. Now, what I'm doing is I'm going to look into these eras individually. The first era first, that is the Nehruvian era. Who was Nehru, or who were these initial leaders of India? Whether Nehru or Patel or Maulana Abul Kalam Azad or Acharya J.V. Kripalani, they all came from a similar backdrop. The backdrop of India's freedom movement, primarily Gandhian style of movement, a highly moral and ethical form of movement. Result, all these leaders, whether Nehru, whether Patel, whether J.B. Kripalani, whether Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, Lal Bahadur Shastri, they all in their public life practiced probity, honesty, integrity. Right? Result, the approach during this span, this Nehruvian era, was more or less common. Okay, we would see certain particular principles based on which the whole approach would be designed. Some principles on which Nehru focused too much, perhaps. Okay, these are primarily 7 principles given by Nehru. What are they? Number 1, anti-colonialism. You can easily understand why. India itself has been victim of colonialism for 190 years. 190 years of British rule, which practically ruined India's economy. If I quote from Pax Indica of Shashi Tharoor, I must admit that in 1707 or during 1700, when the Britishers were coming to India for the first time, they came to India actually during the time of Jahangir. Even during the time of Aurangzeb, India's share of global trade was 32%. And in 1947, 240 years after the death of Aurangzeb, when the British finally left India, India's share of global trade was merely 2%. Not only that, India, which was a net exporter, India's export was far more greater than its import. That country by 1947 became a net importer. There was hardly anything in the form of export other than raw materials and food grain. Everything else we used to import. Clear? So as a result, you can easily understand why Nehru and all the initial leaders, they were anti-colonialists in their approach. Not only that, anti-racism. How did our colonial masters treat us? What was the primary idea? What was the primary way of them looking at us? The dirty N word that is quite often than not attributed to the people of African origin. Yes, that particular word was also attributed to us. Okay. So as a result, you can easily understand why the initial leadership, they very cautiously took this stand of anti-racism. India itself has been a victim of racism. Why? How could India turn a blind eye to racism as a result? So whether anti-colonialism or anti-racism, these proved to be the 2 milestones of the initial foreign policy making. Not only that, along with these two came faith in multilateralism and UN. You must be knowing that in 1945, when UN was formed, India was one of the original signatories. One of the original 51 signatories of the UN Charter. So when Nehru and these leaders initially they are taking charge of India, everywhere there was a wave of change. The traditional superpowers, Britain, France, they knew their time is over. Their time was getting over. Two new superpowers were coming up, USA and Soviet Union. And in the backdrop, an air of multilateralism was on the rise. That's the ambience, that's the environment in which India starts its journey. So quite obviously, these initial leaders, they also went for multilateralism, and at the same point of time, they started looking at UN. Okay. Next, disarmament. Okay. Well, you can easily understand these leaders, they had their primary backdrop in Gandhian form of movement, a highly ethical and non-violent form of movement. So naturally, all these leaders, they were far more in favor of disarmament. In fact, Nehru perhaps took this particular policy a bit too far, and India paid the price for this. I have to admit that. 1962 war was a typical example of India paying the price for this policy of disarmament, right? Next, peaceful use of nuclear energy. Absolutely. Just imagine the Prime Minister and his advisor on nuclear energy. They both jointly roaming around the world in search of reactor. That's Nehru and Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha. Jointly the two, they finally could influence the Americans, and with the help of the Americans, secure the first atomic reactor called Apsara from Canada, a 50 megawatt reactor which has been decommissioned, but you can still see this reactor if you go to Trombay in Bark, Bhabha Atomic Research Center. Okay, that's the first nuclear reactor which came to India, and the uranium core for this particular reactor came from France, again with the help of USA. Okay, so that's how Nehru and Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha, they were playing. But Nehru was very clear about one particular thing. Nehru was not looking at arming India or becoming a nuclear power country. No, Nehru's objective was to use nuclear power or nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, electricity generation, medical purposes, whatever it might be, but not weaponing India, not arming India. Okay. Next, number 6. Well, this is perhaps the most significant form of Nehruvian foreign policy or Nehruvian policy making. That is a policy of non-alignment. Okay. Nehru was very clear and categorical. And given the time, I cannot blame Nehru as well. His conceptualization was absolutely right in respect to that time. Nehru was looking at the world from a very objective point of view, and he realized that there are two superpowers, on one hand USA and on the other hand Soviet Union, and they both have their own lobbies, their own clubs. USA and its group of supporters, the first world; Soviet Union and its group of supporters, the second world. Clear? But these superpowers, they have money, or they had money. They had money, they had resources. They could use or waste those resources by engaging against each other or engaging with each other, engaging into duel. India was a newly independent country. Resource was a very scarce thing here, right? In this condition, would it have been right for India to join one of these camps and waste the resources, the precious resources which India had, to wage the war of these superpowers? No. Not only that, these superpowers, they would have used India like a pawn. So Nehru decided, no, we are not going to get into any of these blocks. Rather, we will be doing something unique. We will be maintaining equal distance from both sides. So this is USA, this is Soviet Union, and this is India. India will maintain equal distance from both the sides. But at the same point of time, India will also maintain equal friendship with both the sides. India will neither side with USA nor side with Soviet Union. India will maintain a distance, a particular range of distance, and at the same point of time, India would also try to maintain friendship with them. As a result, whenever India wants, India will be taking help from both the sides. Not only India, Nehru envisaged this policy for all the developing and least developed countries who are becoming independent. This is the time, this time of end of 1940s, the fag end of 1940s and 1950s, early 1950s. This is the time for independence of the various countries. India became independent, Pakistan became independent, Sri Lanka became independent, Myanmar became independent, Ghana, Indonesia, one country after another, they were becoming independent. Okay, so during this backdrop, India decided that no, India will play the role of a leader of all these developing and least developed countries who are becoming independent, these newly independent countries. India will lead them, and at the same point of time, India will help them to maintain this equal distance from both the sides and take advantage from both the sides. That's the policy of non-alignment. Okay, what happens as a result? The first thing that happened, it was in 1956. The newly independent country called Indonesia. In a small town of Indonesia, the name is Bandung. In Bandung, Indonesia, Nehru and 4 of his friends. Who are these 4 friends? The President of Indonesia, Sukarno, obviously. It's happening in Indonesia only. The President of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser. The President of Yugoslavia, Joseph Broz Tito. And the President of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah. Okay. These 4 friends of Nehru. In fact, Kwame Nkrumah, he was a classmate of Nehru in Cambridge. So you can easily understand how close friends they were. Okay. So Nehru and these 4 friends of Nehru, they would jointly organize the first Afro-Asian Summit. We call it Afro-Asian Summit, that's a formal name, but people, we normally know this summit as Bandung Conference, the precursor for NAM. It is here that Nehru would come out with his policy of non-alignment, that we would side with no one, but we would maintain equal distance and equal friendship with both the sides. Okay, now let me warn you here. Previously we have seen questions from NAM on number of times. Okay. Even I have faced one question from NAM, especially about the success of NAM. Time and again, these type of questions, they are repeated by UPSC. So be careful here. I'll go in a bit details about NAM here. That's why, because I personally have an experience of NAM, so I'll be asking question, or I'll be trying to go in details about NAM. See, NAM as such, as an international movement, is a failure. It was launched in 1961 in Belgrade, Serbia. But today, how much are we concerned about NAM? There are 120 countries, no doubt. The conference of NAM takes place from time and again. But we are hardly bothered about NAM. That's the reality. Clear? In spite of that, we need to understand whether NAM was a complete failure or not. Now see, exactly what I am saying, non-aligned movement, the international movement, that's a failure, no doubt about it. Hardly anyone bothers about NAM today. But non-alignment as a foreign policy tool, that's very much successful for India. How? I'm looking at the initial days of India. Just see how India was taking help from both the sides because of this policy of non-alignment. How come? Now, say for example, I have already told you about the first reactor, the first atomic reactor which India secured with the help of USA from Canada. The reactor came from Canada, the uranium core came from France. Similarly, ISRO, Indian Space Research Organization, Dr. Homi Jahangir, not Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha, Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, he was working with NASA. It was NASA who helped India to form ISRO initially. Even the 3 sounding rockets which India tested, they were also given by NASA. Okay, On the other hand, the first 10 steel plants, the steel plants which were established in India, they were all gifted by Soviet Union. Okay. Not only that, the dams which were constructed initially, Damodar Valley Corporation, Hirakud Bandh, Bhakra Nangal Canal project, they were all, these projects were carried forward with the help of Soviet Union. Simultaneously, in 1965, when India would be facing, from 65 to 68, India would be facing severe economic crisis, it would be both USA and Soviet Union who would come and stand by India. 1962 war between India and China. Okay, if USA directly helped India, Soviet Union decided to remain neutral. Even Soviet Union remaining neutral itself was a very big help for India. Okay, so this way, and even in the field of higher education, if the IITs, they are formed on the basis of the Soviet model, the IIMs and IISc. The IIMs are actually modeled after the Harvard Business School, and the IISc after MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Okay, so NAM, or non-alignment, as a foreign policy tool for India, it was extremely successful. Okay, the next policy of Nehru, or the next policy within the Nehruvian era, Panchsheel policy. Normally, by Panchsheel policy, we mean 5 principles which are enumerated in the India-China Friendship Treaty of 1954. What are these 5 policies? Number 1, mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Number 2, mutual non-aggression. Number 3, mutual non-interference in each other's internal affairs. Number 4, equality and mutual benefit. Number 5, peaceful coexistence. Okay. Now, people say that 1954 India-China Friendship Treaty is the example of Panchsheel, but that's not the only example of Panchsheel. Nehru has been using Panchsheel, these 5 principles, wherever he could. Whether you talk of Nehru's policy of tribal integration, that's also called Panchsheel policy, Nehru's Panchsheel policy of tribal integration. You talk about India's friendship treaty with Nepal 1950. Even prior to that, India's friendship treaty with Bhutan 1949, with Sikkim 1949, they all are examples. If you go through these treaties, they all are examples of these Panchsheel principles. Okay, so that's about Panchsheel treaty or Panchsheel principles. That's the overall contour of the Nehruvian era. Okay, this Nehruvian era which went on from 1946-47 to 1970. How this era is going to be, an idea of that was given by Nehru very early. It was April 1947. India was still not independent. Even in that backdrop, Nehru in 1947 organized the first Asian Relations Conference. In Delhi. It was here that Nehru gave a brief idea of the Nehruvian foreign policy, how Nehru is going to approach. Clear? And this policy went on from 46-47 to 70. Hardly anyone tried to make any major shift from this. But by the end of 1970, number of experiences which India would gain would force India to change this tract. This is the time of Mrs. Indira Gandhi. She was already back for the second time in 1970. Okay, what happens? Mrs. Gandhi was a very quick learner. She learnt her lessons very quickly. Two major experiences would make her change the policy holistically. The first one, obviously the experience of Bangladesh. December 1970, after the election results in East Pakistan, West Pakistan would unleash a reign of terror in East Pakistan. Just imagine the total number of people killed and who were displaced, who were internally displaced, who were massacred. The total figure of the affected people is 30 million, 3 crore. Just by January 1971, just by this time, a total of 10 crore refugees, 10 million refugees, 1 crore people, they poured in from East Pakistan to various bordering states of India, whether that be Tripura, Assam, West Bengal. A total of 10 million, 1 crore. India itself was in a very bad economic condition. A few while back I told you that from 1965 to 1968, India was suffering from an economic crisis. In post-independence consolidation, we call this period as the 3 rolling plans. Okay. India hardly had, there was severe drought, and India hardly had any money to come out with a 4th 5-year plan. The 3rd 5-year plan had ended in 1965, but India hardly had any money to start with the 4th 5-year plan. So what India did? India rolled the 3rd 5-year plan only 1 year at a time, with the expectation that maybe next year things would be better. Finally, in 68, there was some rainfall, and by that time, the Green Revolution also started in India, and India was making some forward steps. India was taking some forward steps. Or else, condition was really bad during that time. In 68, the economic crisis ended and India was just evolving, just emerging out of the crisis. And in January 1971, there was 1 crore refugees. Tell me, how would India survive? Mrs. Gandhi, she would go to a hurricane tour of the West. We call it a hurricane tour. What is a hurricane tour? The way hurricanes, they hit the coast. In a similar way, Mrs. Gandhi, she was hopping, skipping and jumping from one Western capital to another. She was moving very fast. She was trying to engage with as many people as possible. Paris, London, Washington, she was going everywhere. One objective: to educate the people, to meet with the leaders and tell them what kind of carnage that Pakistanis they are doing in East Pakistan, and as a result India is becoming affected. To make them engage in this issue so that they can stop Pakistan from doing this. Problem is, while the common people, they understood India's point, I must say that it was actually the effort of Reuters, BBC, CNN. They were continuously showing the kind of torture that Pakistanis they were doing in East Pakistan. Okay, so given that the common people of the West, they were in favor of India, not the leaders. What was the attitude of the leaders? It's India's problem, let India handle. Why should we be bothered? Okay, so that's how things were going on. It was in this backdrop that Mrs. Gandhi decided ki enough. Enough is enough, we'll have to do something. And what did India do? Well, the first thing that she did, while coming back from the West, she didn't come back to India directly. She went to Moscow and started a round of negotiations with Russia. Okay, 6 months from February 1971, she went to Moscow in February 1971. From February 1971 to August 1971, 6 months period. And in August 1971, India and Soviet Union, they would sign a 10-year long friendship treaty. India would move away from non-alignment policy. India will shift towards Soviet Union. India will not be a Soviet bloc country. No, India would never become a socialist country or a Soviet bloc country. But India would become an ally of Soviet Union, a formal ally of Soviet Union, which till now India was refraining very cautiously. India was not doing very cautiously. India would make that step, or India would take that step. Not only that, India would also take a very bold measure or a very bold step. What is that step? India would decide, see, these small countries in India's neighborhood, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, anything wrong going on in these countries and India will have to pay the price. In fact, this idea, the second idea, was far more strengthened by the experience of Sikkim, 1975. Sikkim was an independent country like Bhutan, an Indian protectorate but independent country. And who was the head of Sikkim? A king called Chogyal. Okay. The old Chogyal, all of a sudden it was announced that the old Chogyal, he has fallen in love with an American lady and he is going to marry. Fine. Later on it was realized that this American lady, she is an operative of CIA. What's happening? Please open your atlas. This is international relations. In the first video only I told you to always carry the atlas with you. Okay. Open the atlas please. Take out India's map. Just see in the north of West Bengal where Sikkim is located. Sikkim, that region, if it is an independent country, it would be having 4 boundaries. In the north, it would be China. In the south, it would be India. In the east, it would be Bhutan. In the west, it would be Nepal. That's Sikkim. Clear? Result, USA, they were looking at Sikkim. They were planning to convert Sikkim into their base. They were planning to convert Sikkim into their base so that they can use Sikkim and have a tab both on China and on India. Result, this was realized both by China and India. Result, practically a race started. A race between USA, China and India. India was the last one to get involved in the race. However, what would happen in Sikkim? All the political parties, they would come together and they would announce that they don't accept the Chogyal anymore. The Chogyal, he has been doing sufficient wrong. The political parties, they announced that now it would be the people of Sikkim who would decide. They would throw away the Chogyal. Normally in this condition, the army of the country, they engage. They engage in favor of the king. Not here. The general of Sikkimese army, he would announce that no, whatever people decide, army of Sikkim will respect that. And as a result, these political parties of Sikkim, they would organize a plebiscite, a national election. A national parliament would be elected, and that parliament, they would do the first act. The first act of that parliament would be to pass a resolution requesting India to make Sikkim a part of India. And Indian parliament would also immediately make Sikkim a part of it. This experience would tell India far more strongly that India will have to be careful about its neighborhood. Because other powers, they would try to use India's neighborhood. Okay? So India adopts a policy, a very strong policy, a very dominant kind of policy called Indira Doctrine with 2 particular aspects. Aspect number 1, India's alignment towards Soviet Union. Aspect number 2, India would become very high-handed about its neighborhood, these neighboring countries. India would say that these neighboring countries, if anything goes wrong here, India will have to pay the price. So India will interfere in their internal affairs. Just opposite to Panchil policy. See, in Panchil policy, the first aspect was mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty, and then non-interference in each other's internal affairs. And at the same point of time, peaceful coexistence. India would say no. If something goes wrong in these countries, India will have to pay the price. And India is not ready to pay the price. Clear? Thus would start the era of Indira Gandhi, or Indira era, or Indira Doctrine as we call it. Clear? Now, one thing I would like to do here, I should make it clear. I am not willing to make any video lengthier. I'll try to keep the videos somewhat within 30 minutes to 45 minutes, not more than that. Okay. The reason is that most of you will be watching these videos in your mobile phones. Watching videos on mobile phones, I can understand how much hectic it is. Even those people who are watching on laptop and on desktop, having concentration for more than 30 or 45 minutes is very difficult. So I would prefer to keep the videos very, very short, or not very short, but comprehensively smaller, in length. I'm actually dividing this topic into two parts. In first part, I have discussed about the Nehruvian era and Indira doctrine. In the second part, I'll be talking in details about the present economy-centric foreign policy, and at the same point of time, the conceptualization of Mr. S. Jaishankar. Though I'm not discussing this particular era, but I would like to discuss the previous year's questions here. Just see why in the beginning I said that this particular topic is significant. I'm reading out the questions. This question, all these questions, they are after the change of the syllabus. I'm not taking any question before the change of the syllabus. I'm taking questions only from 2013 onwards. This is a question of 2013 only. Question number 24. What it reads: what is meant by Gujral doctrine? We'll study about Gujral doctrine in present economy-centric foreign policy. Okay. What is meant by Gujral doctrine? How does it have any relevance today? Discuss. Okay. Next question, 2016, question number 18. This is question number 18 of 2016. Evaluate the economic and strategic dimensions of India's lookist policy in the context of post-Cold War international scenario. To 1992, India will initiate a policy within this present economy-centric foreign policy called Look East policy. This question is typically on that. Then the third question, 2017. This is question number 19 of 2017. The question of India's energy security constitutes the most important part of India's economic progress. Analyze India's energy policy cooperation with West Asian countries. In 1992, in this present economy-centric foreign policy, along with Look East policy, India also started a policy called the Look West policy. This particular question is typically on that. Okay. Then 2019, the last mains. Question is question number 19. The long sustained image of India as a leader of the oppressed and marginalized nations has disappeared on account of its new-found role in the emerging global order. Elaborate. The changes we are seeing. The changes we are seeing within this present economy-centric foreign policy, and also we'll be talking about these changes while discussing the conceptualization of S. Jaishankar. Okay. So see how the questions they have been framed. Why these questions, at least 3 of them, they are 15 markers. So you can easily understand the significance of this particular topic. Okay. In the next particular video, I'll be going thoroughly with this particular section, this present economy-centric foreign policy and the conceptualization of S. Jaishankar. Okay. Be careful, be sincere, and one more thing, I would be making this appeal time and again. Write these questions. Write these questions and send them to us. Our aspirants, I'm obviously appealing to you. You're seeing this video only because you're an aspirant of ours. So, or you're an aspirant of civil services and you're a member here. So I would obviously be asking you, write these questions, write them down, send these questions to us. I ensure that we'll be going through those questions, those answers, will correct them and will send them to you back. And again and again, I'll be repeating this. See, for your benefit only, we have devised the engagement with you in 3 particular stages. If you have any problem here while seeing this video or even the second part, please write down write down the comment. If you have any you need any clarity on any particular issue, write down a comment on the comment section. I'll respond to you. If you think you're not comfortable in writing that comment because others will be seeing, fine. There's a number given there. Contact that number, contact our WhatsApp number, ask for an appointment with me. Given that time, I'll call you. Okay. We can have a discussion, one-to-one discussion during that point of time. However, this one-to-one discussion, this would be available only for limited number of students. Obviously, you can understand, given my schedule, the kind of schedule that I have, I may not be able to entertain more number of students. That's why we are also going for this live classes every week. This is also for your benefit. On every Saturday from 8 to 9, most probably. If I'm late by some reason, primarily because of my classes, it will be from 9 p.m. onwards. But primarily the time would be every Saturday from in between 8 to 9. During that time, whether on Zoom or on Skype, will be announcing it. I'll prefer to go on Zoom only, if we can. On every Saturday from in between 8 to 9, I'll be live on Zoom. We'll also share all these links with you people. These links must be given there already. So on Zoom only, we'll discuss these things with you. Okay, I'll go live and there we can discuss face to face. And simultaneously, please write these questions, write them down and send those questions to us. I'll ensure that I correct them and they are sent back to you. Okay, that's all guys. That's all for this video. In the next video, we'll be going forward with the present economic-centric foreign policy accordingly. Thank you.